everyone, and welcome to the EdTech podcast. Apologies for the background noise. I'm recording this from a hotel lobby. This week we've got an interplanetary episode with Francois Taddei of the Centre for Research and Interdisciplinarity in Paris. Francois talks about collective intelligence and going back to the ideals of the university, both in the freedom to learn and to connect with our mentors. I moderated a panel with Francois at WISE in Paris, where I was lucky enough to also meet the wonderful Heidi Harju-Lukainen, Professor of Education at Nord University, Khaled Helio, and past podcast guest Joel Hellemark of Sana Labs. All wonderful mentors indeed, and shout out to the WISE team for putting on a great event. Some newsy bits this week. If you're out at South by Southwest EDU, have a great time. Listeners Oya Labs are having a whole child tech meetup at South by Southwest on the 6th of March, and you're all invited. The Eventbrite link is in our show notes. What else? The next billion EdTech prize contenders have just been announced. Congrats to all 30 EdTech orgs, including Seppo, Ubongo and Orgli. Full list is also in the show notes. What else? I've been busy preparing for our live recording of the EdTech podcast at DigiFest. Come along and say hi on the 12th to the 13th of March in Birmingham if you're in the UK. Another event I've noted with interest is the Cambridgeshire Festival of Education, as curated by the effervescent head teacher Ray Snape. Edu listeners, go and check that one out. And if you're more of the EdTech persuasion, you also might like to know that the WISE Accelerator call is happening right now. So if you want to find out about that, go and also check out the link in the show notes. Did I mention the show notes? Pretty useful, eh? Tomorrow I'm in Cambridge as the Yidan Prize comes to Cambridge University. I'm looking forward to hearing from speakers including Dr. Charles Chen Yidan, co-founder at Tencent and founder of the Yidan Prize Foundation, Professor Stephen Toop, the Vice-Chancellor at the University of Cambridge, and Dr. David Halpern, Chief Executive of the Behavioural Insights Team and National What Works Advisor. Thanks to Dr. Julian Huppert at the Jesus College Intellectual Forum for hosting. And finally, as if this epic run of events news wasn't enough, I'll throw one more in. I've been helping out on a higher ed event which takes place in London on the 11th and 12th of June called Future EdTech. The event looks at the changes facing higher education both from the perspective of the student and the institution. I've managed to convince wonderful speakers including Mary Kernock-Cook, the former Chief Exec of UCAS, Simon Launder, Deputy Chief Digital Information Officer at Coventry University, and Lord Jim Knight, Head of Education at TES, among 30 others including the London Interdisciplinary School, Harvard and the Office for Students, to come along and share their ideas. The event is free to those from universities and there is a listener discount of 20% for everyone else. The all-important code is podcast20. Right, that's more than enough for now. Have a great week, everyone, and here's my conversation with Francois. Okay, brilliant. So I'm really delighted because I've managed to corner Francois Taddei from Cree here in Paris. So welcome, Francois.
Welcome.
You've been quite instrumental in this event with WISE Paris, and you were hosting at Cree yesterday an event. Can you tell us a little bit about what Cree is all about and how you've come to launch that as well?
So Cree started very, very tiny, a few square meters, and now we've grown exponentially to 7,000 square meters in about 15 years. What's special is that we try to start from the student's perspective and to help students, but also teachers and researchers and, change makers more generally, to come together to do things that they could not do alone. Because they have all different type of knowledge, of disciplines, of background, of culture. We have like 50 nationalities, and we have progressively developed a bachelor program, master program, PhD programs, but also K-12 programs. So all age, and every time we start with the curiosity of the learner, whatever the age. From 3 years old on. And we even have opened a baby lab. So, we cover all the age range now. And we basically try to start from the questions, the curiosity, and feed it and put the scientific disciplines and the different methods that different academic paradigms have developed at the service of the projects and of the curiosity. and we mobilize collective intelligence. And so in a nutshell, what we try to do is reinvent the way we learn, teach, do research, mobilize collective intelligence, so that every one of us should be able to take care of oneself, of others, and of the planet.
That's quite lofty goals, which is amazing. But and what's interesting is from your description there. So it's a Centre for Research in Interdisciplinarity, which I've just about managed. But it's not it's not a university, or it's not a school, or it's not a research lab only.
Yes, it's both a university department, but it's also an NGO. And in fact, the NGO and the university have co-created the department, and we work with all stakeholders. For instance, we work with UNESCO. I have a UNESCO chair on learning science, but more generally, we are trying to be a sort of R&D lab for institutions that don't have them. So UNESCO doesn't have an R&D lab. Universities do research on nearly every topic but themselves
and
their
their
future.
This comment you had earlier, I actually wrote it down on my piece of paper when I was moderating our session. So could you expand a little bit on that and where you think the gap is for universities understanding themselves better?
Well, I think the academic life is full of feedback loop that encourage research more than teaching and even more than the learning of the students. So the question of reinventing universities' role in the digital age is a question that very few universities have taken seriously. Reflecting on oneself and reflecting that we may not be perfect is not, something that lots of people do well, and especially institutions that might be very old and very venerable and very prestigious and charging a lot of money and so on. So they have a good reason to say, we're perfect and we should never change anything. Okay, but I don't think they are perfect, and I do think that they should change some things, and I do think that anyway we have to think of a way to scale what the best that they can offer. Not the worst, but the best. And if you took just the numbers of new universities that are needed at the world level, we should open a new one every year for the next 10 to 20 years just to accommodate the new generations of students worldwide.
So, proceeding with the idea that that's just never going to happen, because it's physically impossible near enough. What do you see as playing out? Will it be a kind of blended learning approach, or how will we kind of fill that gap?
I think it's some sort of blended, but you have to rethink the modes of learning. So for instance, there is several ways to categorize learning. Is it unidirectional? Or is it, peer or multilateral? Is it individual or collective? Are you free to learn what you want, or are you put into some rails that you have to follow? Is it that you have to learn something that lots of people do know, or something that nobody knows, but is crucial for you, so you really want to push, and then you're sort of a researcher. And so if you want not only to learn yesterday's knowledge and yesterday's solution, but you're faced with today's problem and you want to invent tomorrow's solution, doing it on your own is very hard. But if you belong to an open collective where in an open source mode people share each of them their little parts of solutions, maybe collectively you can assemble the bricks and build a new clever paradigm that can maybe be scaled later.
Well, and that's interesting because you mentioned citizen science earlier, or citizen science approaches, and it's come up in a few conversations I've had over the last week. And just this week I was speaking to a researcher from Denmark, a researcher into hybrid intelligence, and she was talking about using modes of citizen science to kind of get people engaged in this idea of AI and what it means for their work, and it not just being two-dimensional, but it is going to be messy because it involves humans. And so how you mentioned your project with UNESCO. How do we do citizen science in a way that measuring the impact whilst at the same time allowing us to be messy enough because we're human?
So I think there are several very interesting dimensions there. Collective intelligence have to be both catalyzed and canalized, because collective stupidity is something that works very well. Okay?
We've got plenty of that at the moment.
We've got plenty of that, and the web can be an amplifier. Okay, and we've got lots of evidence for this now. And so we have to have a lot of critical thinking, but we have to have modes for this. So, for instance, in science, the average scientist is not so much clever. It's the collective of scientists that is really making a difference, because scientists learn to review each other's work and climb on each other's shoulders in order to see further and further. So that's something which the scientific method has developed over the decades and centuries, that allows science to be a collective intelligence platform that led us to most of the advance that we know today. But so the question is, how do you do this? For instance, Wikipedia has some structure to mobilize the collective intelligence so that the edition wars will end up in a good way, because that's not obvious to begin with. So we have to invent modes to catalyze and canalize collective intelligence, and in general we don't know. There is some cases where we do know. Okay, for instance, in health research, lots of patients have been involved in research and have helped progress. What was happening so far only within the laboratory of the ivory tower. So opening the ivory tower can be successful, but you have to know how to do it. And so in a way, we need the science of the citizen science. We need to research on these things. But one of the topics which I'm really keen on starting to research through citizen science is the future of learning. The today of learning and the future of learning simultaneously. So what are the ways we learn today? There is no single person, even in the best possible lab in the world, that can answer this. Okay, but all of us have part of the answer. And if we could assemble all of our answers, we could describe the thousands of ways that we use to learn every day. And so that would be already very interesting. And then you could analyze this data and you could say, but that's funny, this did not exist a few years ago, this is an emerging trend. Right. Is it valid for everything, or it's only domain specific? It's there is so much you can learn through games, and other things you can learn through doing, and other things you can learn through inquiry, or through discussions, or through things you learn as a doctor, for instance, only when you see a patient, that you will never learn in any other environment, etc. So you could start mapping the where, the when, the how, the why, and the what of learning, and you could celebrate it. You could create a learning festival at the planetary level where we would all be invited to celebrate and share our learning, and celebrate the people that have helped us to learn, because most of the time we've learned in some environment, maybe alone on a mountain, but maybe through Wikipedia, maybe through YouTube, maybe through a fantastic lecture you heard or something.
So through people's generosity as well. And one of my questions to the investors today was, how with the kind of market mechanisms, it's easy for lots of investment to pour into STEM, because that's what sort of governments are signalling that is of interest at the moment. But you've been very successful in securing investment with Cree, which is obviously looking at how the different disciplines intersect. So what's the role of investment in making sure that we have a sensible approach to learning, and that it's not swinging from science or to art, but involves both?
I think we have to go from STEM to STEAM, with adding the A of art into the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But I think that you have to realize that opposing these things is probably the least sensible things to do. So it's not just finding one or the other, is how can you find the combinations of both, okay? Today we are in an art museum, and it's an inspiring environment. And what we do know from history of science is that most of the great scientists of even the 20th century, not to talk about the Renaissance, were also artists. And I think we have to develop both our ability to imagine and be very creative and very exploratory, and also to have critical thinking. And so, there is a moment for diversity and there is a moment for selection. And that's, Darwinian evolution is about, variability, selection, and then amplification.
And I loved your point earlier about mentoring. Would you be able to share that with our listeners?
Yeah, I think, Humboldt, 200 years ago, redesigned universities. And he said, university should be a place where you're free to learn, free to teach, free to do research, but you should also be able to find mentors to help the students' project. And I think, the web, we're free to learn. We're somewhat free to teach through the web. We are free to research if we want, but we don't find mentors. So I think one of the key role of academic institutions, schools and universities, is to be able to find mentors, because that's a rare capacity that should be emphasized and acknowledged and developed, because there is no course to become a mentor. But we can also back to why do we need mentors, and where it comes from. And interestingly, the first mentor was Mr. Mentor, and he was the mentor of Telemachus, that was looking for his father, Odysseus, I think you say in English. And Mentor was in fact the goddess of wisdom and science, Athena, and she was there to mentor Telemachus. So I think that teachers and professors should become goddess of wisdom and science and become mentors, which may not know all the answers, but may know the best processes to look for answers, and help the students develop their own personality and overcome their own challenges.
And is it true that you used to be a civil servant?
That I'm a civil servant?
Yes, or that you used to be.
I am a civil servant.
You are a civil servant, because you strike me as the least civil servant person I've ever met, which is
You mean I'm not very civil, or I'm not very servant?
You have this kind of freedom of expression. How did this all come about?
Well, I mean, the French education system is very weird, but I became a sort of a civil servant when I was 19, and I was in the middle of my or engineering school, or beginning my engineering school. And so this is very weird in France. But then I did my PhD, and then I in genetics. So I studied math and physics, and then engineering, and then genetics, and then evolution, and then systems biology. And now I'm somewhat interested in other dimensions of knowledge ecosystem and so on. But interestingly, because I became a civil servant, the state has to fund me whatever I do. Okay, my role is to convince them that what I do is somewhat useful for the public good.
Yeah.
And then they should identify the box that should pay my salary within the whole of French administration. But 20 years ago, 2002, 17 years ago, I got an award from the Medical Research Council, and so ever since, the Medical Research Council has been funded me for my explorations.
So if you could fund anything aside from Cree right now, what would be your next kind of project be, if you could be really ambitious, even more so?
So one of my dreams is to find a way to transform the planet into a learning planet. Okay, so that's so far my limitation is at the planetary boundary, and a learning planet would be a planet where systematically we've organized ourselves in a way that maximize not only the individual learning but also the collective learning. And so a learning planet would be a planet where every time someone has learned something, if someone else wants to learn the same thing, they should be connected. The first one should have documented what they've done, and they should be collaborating one way or the other, directly or indirectly.
You're not inventing the wheel all the time. You're kind of cutting to the chase much more quickly.
Yeah. And so every time you innovate, you document and share. So you basically use the open source, open education, open science, open data philosophy to its maximal possibilities, and you put this ability of the learning planet to become a healthy planet, where we learn to take care of ourselves, of others, and of the planet. So that will be really nice. And one way, I think a learning organization should also learn from other organizations. So the question is, a learning planet should in theory learn from other planets. So one of the big questions is, how do you learn from other planets? And I started to think about this, and I wondered, what is the only thing that travels faster than light? Do you know?
Is it if you slingshot out of a black hole? I don't know.
At least, my personal answer so far is imagination.
Okay.
So if you want to project yourself at the other side of the galaxy,
you just do it.
You can just do it, and it's sort of instantaneous. Okay, so that's magic in a way.
Yeah.
And another interesting thing is that every one of us could have our own planet or own star if we want, because there is more star in the galaxy, and a fortiori in the universe, than there is human beings on the planet. So we are all entitled to have our own star and to imagine, if there is life in one of those planets around, and how is it organized. And so we could basically crowdsource imagination by inviting every one of us to dream of an alternative planetary ecosystem and planetary society another learning planet. And so we could learn from other planets, at least in imagination.
I love that idea because it's a blank slate. You can start from scratch. You're not drawn back into the same conversations about Trump and Brexit that are draining our collective intelligence at the moment. So
exactly.
Yeah, that's a great idea. If people are
but then you could do the travel back.
Yeah.
So in the sense
and
that
then you bring those ideas home and
exactly.
make them real.
Exactly.
Well, one of my recent guests was like, what would a university look like if you set it up on Mars? And then maybe that's a similar kind of idea of trying to be free and imagine.
If you have not just one alternative planet, but billions of them, you can probably learn from clever solutions there.
And if people are listening in and they're very excited and interested, are there any particular partners that you would welcome into Cree or any other projects? And how would people connect with you and find out what you're up to?
Well, we have a Cree website, and I've got a Twitter account, and all these things that you can probably relay. But I think that we are looking for ugly little ducklings that want to do things together that they cannot do alone, and where they want to contribute to the sort of discussion we had in terms of redesigning our own futures. And I think that we have lots of dystopia these days, and I think we have to invent collective utopias, and we have already a lot of artists and scientists, but I think that we have programs for some of what I described, but I would love to have an artist in residence program. So that's something we should invent, and I would love to host, say, J.K. Rowling in the Cree, to invite her to help us mobilize the collective intelligence of readers in projecting themselves into another planet, and then harnessing this collective intelligence from all of those other planets, and then write the second book, and then you nurture the imagination of
so to be able to communicate that collective intelligence in a way that resonates with the population.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Francois. I really appreciate your time.
My very pleasure.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed our interstellar conversation and it gives you the lift you need wherever you're listening into this. A big shout out to lovely listener school head of department for computing, Mrs. R at Livs Rodriguez, who said, "I absolutely adore your podcasts." So thanks very much, Mrs. R, and you made our day, so thanks very much, and keep the feedback coming in. If you know someone who might like the podcast, keep spreading the word and we'll keep putting out our fresh episodes. That's all until next time. Have a great week.